World Economic Forum just concluded their annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland this week. And there are a lot of people who have many concerns and questions about the World Economic Forum and their intent. Here to help us unpack it all is Mark Gober. He is an author located in Southern California. He has written An End to the Upside Down Reset, the leftist vision for society under the Great Reset, and how it can be fool-carrying people into supporting harmful causes. How it can fool caring people. That's a mouthful. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, John. Yeah, the main title of the book is just An End to the Upside Down Reset, and you read the full thing with the subtitle.
Yes.
So thank you.
So what motivated you to write this book? And I understand it's one of 7, a series?
Yes. Yes. So the first books that I wrote were more, let's just say, metaphysical. Who are we and why are we here? What's the science behind our existence? And then 2020 hit. And I became much more interested in following the political narratives, especially everything happening with COVID. And then in the summer of 2020, very powerful people announced the Great Reset. This was Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, then Prince Charles, John Kerry. And then also there was a book written by Klaus Schwab and one of his colleagues called COVID-19, The Great Reset. So my point here is there was an explicit vision for society laid out. And what the people who conceived this idea were saying was, yes, COVID is a tragic thing, but it's an opportunity to reshape our world. These were explicit statements. It wasn't conspiracy theory. Anyone could read the book, COVID-19, The Great Reset. So I realized that there was a lot more at play than I had realized, and it made me look much more closely at politics, socioeconomic issues, and just trying to understand the forces that seem to be directing the world and how they're competing. And I realized that this Great Reset vision was not just a short-term vision. And it's probably been something going on for a long time under different names. And it's something that will persist in the future. And just to summarize how I see it, and there's much more detail in the book, this is a battle, if you will, of freedom versus authoritarianism. Those who believe that humans should make decisions on their own versus others who believe that humans should be controlled, that they're sort of parasitic entities on the planet that shouldn't be prosperous, and that they should offload their authority to the experts who will try to keep them safe. And I favor much more the freedom-oriented outlook. And therefore, I thought it was important to lay out and just let people know this is what's explicitly being stated by some very powerful people. We should be aware of it.
It's really kind of scary. And, gives a lot of fodder to conspiratorialists. Steve Bannon says there are no conspiracies, but there sure are a lot of coincidences. And so you take the Great Reset and the book that you described or that you related that Klaus Schwab authored. And, it's interesting to me that in the United States and on the world stage, that when explanations of events start to be revealed, that there seems almost to be a process to get to the truth, but it's very slow in coming and it evolves rather than being told. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the COVID-19 virus. And we were told that it originated in a bat cave 2 hours from Wuhan. Then there was a scientist at the Wuhan laboratory. It was a lady, as I recall, who said, no, we were working on coronaviruses in the lab, and it was released. She did not say whether by accident. And that lady has never been seen or heard of since. Now, I do know that that is factual. So it gives rise to people's concerns and deepest fears, which then lead to conspiracy theories. And if you have noticed, just this week, there has been a refocus on the release of the coronavirus. And we are now being told that, oh, yes, we know factually 100% certain that it came from the Wuhan lab. I don't understand why they don't say, and we don't know whether it was intentional or unintentional. They're leaving the impression that it was unintentional. But it came from a government that we don't trust for good reason. They don't care about human life. They have committed genocide against their own people. And we know that they want to take over the world by 2050 because they've told us so. And then you have the World Economic Forum, which is a combination of some of the largest companies in the world, most of them from the United States. And you couple that with the fact that Larry Fink, who is a member of the World Economic Forum and is the CEO or the chairman of BlackRock, who says that the Chinese form of government may be a better form of government than our government in the United States. You look at it and you say, whoa, what are these people up to and what is it about? So tell me, just straight out, was the COVID-19 virus an unintentional release from the lab or was it intentional? What do you think?
Well, first, John, I want to just add on to what you said about this pattern of information release before I get to SARS-CoV-2, because you raise a really important point that the media will tell us one thing from the experts and we're supposed to just believe it. And then the narrative will change and they don't admit that they were wrong. And maybe they'll say, oh, that's the process of science. But each step along the way, we are expected to believe exactly what we're told by the mainstream press and even politicians. And if you ask a question, you're a conspiracy theorist, which is quite ironic because the scientific process is inherently one of asking questions. Now, with regard to this lab leak theory that we've been hearing about much more as a credible idea. Recently, in the beginning of COVID, this was a conspiracy theory. You're actually touching on something I discussed in my sixth book. It's called An End to Upside Down Medicine. And I have I exposed some controversial theories on this one, which I was not aware of until pretty recently. But there are questions about the notion of a virus and how virology even works. And we're all expected to believe that what happens in these labs and with people working with test tubes, that they are telling us exactly how it all works. But there's a woman in Canada named Christine Massey, who has worked with colleagues all over the world to file freedom of information requests. So these are requests that anyone can submit to ask government agencies about anything. And what she's been asking with her colleagues is whether the virus, SARS-CoV-2, has been properly isolated. And that's an important thing because you need to have an independent variable in a scientific study. It's a very basic thing. If you want to test something to see what its effect is, you have to introduce that thing, the independent variable, and see what happens to the study. The problem is that these freedom of information requests, and she submitted them with her colleagues to over 200 institutions in 40 countries, including the CDC and others, saying, can you show me a purified sample of just the SARS-CoV-2 virus without other stuff in it? And repeatedly, they say, we don't have that. So we run into real problems with trying to understand what's actually going on in these labs. And was there a virus in the way that it's been told to us, or is it more complex? And that's a narrative we don't hear as much in the mainstream press because I know it introduces a lot of wrinkles. But I've spent a lot of time reading these freedom of information requests and seeing what the CDC and others say. They say, we have no records. Every time we have no records of a purified sample of just this virus, which raises a lot of questions because if you don't have just a sample of the virus by itself, how can you run a genetic sequencing of just a virus? How can you run a test? And we know the tests have been imperfect. Sometimes you get false positives and so forth. So I think there are layers of questioning that we might hear about in the future.
Well, giving more ammunition, putting more fuel on the fire, Joe Biden on his way out of the White House in just the very last moments of his miserable administration, provided pardons to a number of people. First of all of his family members, and then members of the J6 Commission, and Anthony Fauci. Now, what necessitated a pardon of Anthony Fauci? Unless he violated the laws of the United States of America and the sovereign states. Which laws would he have violated?
It's a great question. And then on the other side of the spectrum, people will say, well, Fauci did such a good job, and therefore we know that his political opponents will attack him, and it's a good thing that Joe Biden pardoned him because we're saving an American hero. That's the alternative narrative we hear. But there were hearings that anyone could watch where Dr. Fauci was being questioned, and it seemed that his answers contradicted what came up in emails where he was clearly coordinating with other officials. So you raise a great point, John. What might have been hidden? And why would he need to be pardoned?
So what do we know about Anthony Fauci? We know that he is a serial liar. That makes me suspicious. He told us that masking was absolutely required, and it was proven by science to stop the spread of the COVID virus. We know that he lied to us about social distancing. He said that 6 feet was scientifically proven to prevent the spread of the airborne particles that could infect another human being in a public setting. We now know that while he was telling us that there were memorandum that he was had either authored or was in the chain of and possessed the information that said there was no evidence that supported either of those things. We also know that he is the one who told us that the virus came from a bat cave 2 hours away from Wuhan, and that we subsequently learned that that was a lie. And while he was lying to us, we learned that his Department of Government was funding the Wuhan laboratory. Now, I think he has got a tremendous amount of explaining to do. Now, you couple that with the then head of the CDC, who my instinct tells me is a very honest person and genuine individual, was intentionally excluded from meetings that related at the highest levels in our federal government that relating to the COVID virus and the vaccine, because he wasn't buying the narrative. So what did they do? They froze him out. You put it all together, something's not right. One hypothesis is that this was part of some grand plan to further China's domination of the world, and that the World Economic Forum was somehow complicit. As I'm saying the words that sound so outlandish that it couldn't possibly be true, surely I must be furthering conspiracy theories. But when you look at all of the evidence and you look at all the secretiveness that surrounded these conversations. I mean, if you were the head, the most senior member of our government dealing with this, why would you not want the American people to know the truth? Mm-hmm. And why would you lie to them? And why would you cover up the fact that your department had funded, I don't remember the number, 50 million, 150 million, I can't remember, of the Wuhan laboratory. It just smells to high heaven.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the biggest red flag of all of this is the lack of transparency. If there were nothing to hide and the world is going to be shut down on the basis of fear of a virus, why not tell people the full history? Why does it have to be hidden? Why do we have to just wait to see that certain documents are revealed? And why on the mainstream press do we not hear the set of basic facts that you just laid out? I think the reason that what you said sounds so outlandish is because it's not coming from the mainstream press, but it could. And it's really pointing to the need for critical thinking.
Well, how to tame an out of control, dishonest media is a question that we need to delve into. I don't know what the right answer is because I'm a fervent believer in freedom of speech, and that certainly extends to members of the media. But I think that there should be a process of accountability when it can be proven that a member of the media has intentionally lied. I don't know how you then police that and not somehow interfere with freedom of speech. My paradigm has been that the public will self-regulate dishonest brokers. That's what I would prefer to see happen. And I think that we are actually seeing it happen right before our very eyes. CNN's viewership has gone from a high of 3 million viewers to a low of just a few 100,000. I am told that Dan Bongino, who is a podcaster, has more viewers than CNN. And certainly Joe Rogan does. And so I think that is the public regulating dishonesty in the media. We just need more of it, and I think it needs to be even more punitive right now. But what do you make of President Trump's first 7 days in office? Have you ever, in your entire life, seen anything like it?
Wow, well, a lot has certainly happened in a short amount of time. I'm just thinking about where we are today versus 6 months ago.
How about a week ago?
Even a week ago. The acceleration is quite incredible. And it depends on who you ask. If you turn on CNN or read the New York Times, you're going to see a lot of panic. But if you look at those who have been asking questions for a while, this is really some positive momentum. I mean, when Trump was speaking at the World Economic Forum's annual event, Davos, he wasn't there in person, but he did a recorded event that anyone can watch. He said so many things that really counter the World Economic Forum's narrative. For one, he talked about this notion of disinformation and how he doesn't want the government intervening and how he wants people to decide for themselves. I mean, that is in direct contrast to what the WEF has said about what they call a raging problem of disinformation, meaning that they want to control the narrative. So I think that what is happening now is a real shakeup, because whether people agree with Trump's opinions or not, he's exposing ideas that were not being broadcasted on the mainstream press. And now they're having no choice but to expose what he's saying, and the results will speak for themselves.
So did you see also, I think it was the president of Argentina, Javier Milei. Did I pronounce his name right?
Yeah, I believe it's Milei.
Milei. Did you see his address to the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, I saw parts of it, and he has quite a libertarian mentality out of Argentina. He's endorsed, for example, very much free market economic principles like the work of Ludwig von Mises and the Austrian School of Economics. He's another one who is really countering the World Economic Forum's narrative. And what's incredible to me, given where we've been with so much censorship, is that these voices are being platformed on stages where there's a lot of disagreement. And I think that's a very positive development.
Well, I thought that I watched him. I thought that I had several thoughts, actually. One, I thought he was a tremendous communicator. And everything that he said was so diplomatic. To me, I thought he was more Trump than Trump, because he had the Trump mentality and policy perspective without the sting. But he put it right in their eye, and you couldn't get mad at him because he was so polite while he was doing it. But he seemed to contradict everything the World Economic Forum say that they stand for, and he did it so eloquently. I just felt like he was a breath of fresh air. If any of our listeners know how to contact him, I will name you an associate producer of The Truth if you can get him on our show. I got to get this program big enough that he'll come on here. He was one of the most liberating voices I have heard. But just in a week, President Trump has started to round up rapists, murderers, robbers, and deport them. He is taming the world when it comes to pushing back on his agenda. He sent 2 plane loads to Colombia. They wouldn't allow the planes to land. And Trump said, fine, we're going to tariff you to oblivion, 25% starting February the 1st. And by the way, every single member of your diplomatic delegation is going to be sent home. We are going to provide extra special scrutiny of anyone from Colombia coming into America. And this is tantamount to war. He didn't say that. Those are my words, but that is certainly his reaction. And the president of Colombia issued a press release saying, well, we're going to tariff you back 25%. And that lasted about 30 minutes. And he retracted that and said, oh, no, really, you can land your planes here. And by the way, I'll even loan you one of our military planes to bring these people back. I mean, it's like that girl in The Exorcist with her head spinning around. I felt like I was watching the most unbelievable turn of events that I've seen in diplomatic circles for a long time.
Well, we're seeing Trump and the administration playing hardball, and it's something we had not seen in the last 4 years. So I do wonder if some of the talk of tariffs is posturing, and we'll see how it goes. But it clearly worked in one circumstance, and an ability to say we're not going to be pushed around is a new kind of mentality. And it's also a highly nationalist mentality, which is in direct contrast to the globalist mentality of the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset, wanting to consolidate power and having a few people make decisions for everybody. Whereas we're seeing much more nationalistic rhetoric from Trump and some others.
Well, it is so liberating, and his notion of an external Department of Revenue is so exciting because people have gotten a free ride off of this country and have taken full economic advantage of us for decades. I have a friend who's pretty high in the pecking order, and he asked a member of George Bush's cabinet why we were favoring our enemies in our foreign aid. And they responded that, well, you have to understand the delicacies of diplomatic relations and the nuances of foreign relations. And he told me that, and I thought, are you out of your mind? We're going to reward our enemies, and you call that nuanced foreign relations? It is a false expectation. And I think it is in all walks of life, frankly. And I've seen it. I'm 71 years old. I've seen it all. All of us want to be benevolent. Everybody wants to be charitable. Everybody wants to be virtuous. Unfortunately, it usually backfires. I've seen it in parents who try to spoil their children, thinking that it is going, especially, and I don't want to get out on too thin ice here, and I don't want to step on toes, but I'm lucky. I found a good one. But that's not always the case in marriages. And I've observed, I think it's pretty commonly accepted that in divorce, one parent, if not both, will try and incur the favor of the child or children by enriching them, by giving them things, buying them clothes, relaxing discipline. And they think that that's going to make the child love them more than their estranged spouse. I have observed that the opposite occurs. The Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child. The point is, children crave discipline. And no one wants to be the heavy. Nobody wants to be the disciplinarian. But isn't it strange that the child gravitates towards the parent who applies the discipline? Because innately, we know that it's the right thing. We know that the parent loves us when they discipline us because they want us to grow up in a right way. That's my paradigm. Now, our callers can check in with us, 804-778-8888. I'm happy to have that conversation with anybody who would like to debate that today. I would do so out of intellectual curiosity, not to maintain my dogma. But I guess my point is, I think it works in world relations. I think it works in domestic policy. Newt Gingrich told me 35 years ago that the social welfare system was the most destructive thing that we could do in America because recipients go to the welfare office to collect their check. They stand in line for hours waiting to get to the front of the line, and they're greeted by someone who is respectful and surly. They collect their check, they leave, and what happens? Are they grateful? Do they say, oh, thank you so much? No, they're ungrateful, and resentful. And they only want more, thinking they're deserving of more. Okay, so I got off on a bit of a tangent here. It applies in foreign relations too. You cannot buy allegiance. And that's what the Biden administration has tried to do. And who knows what else they've done. We know that Biden took money from companies tied to the CCP. And then what happens? Our Department of Defense tracks a spy balloon all the way from China across the Pacific, entering into Canada and then dipping down in the United States and lingering over our most sensitive nuclear bases for days, only traverse and exit the country in South Carolina when Biden so courageously ordered that it be shot down after the mission is complete and the data has been fed back to the CCP and the Chinese government. Does he really think that we're that big of idiots that we cannot see through that? And what's going on? What is going on?
Well, I want to touch on a theme that hopefully covers many of the things you just eloquently pointed out there, which is this weaponization of compassion.
Yeah.
Where you have people, they say, oh, we're doing this to protect you. And they use very flowery language. If you read the book, COVID-19, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab and his colleague, it doesn't sound authoritarian on the surface. It's all about making the world a better place. But the question is this a wolf in sheep's clothing? And that's what people need to start asking more and more, that their deception is a real thing. Just because something sounds benevolent and compassionate doesn't mean that's going to be the consequence of it. And we see this especially on the left. This has actually to do with political psychology. People on the left are more influenced by compassion or by compassionate sounding things. And they might then ignore the ways in which a policy might not actually be compassionate in other ways. They'll just see the surface level aspects of it. And really what we all need to be doing is looking at the layers, not just what it sounds like, but what actually the impact is. And as people say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
But I don't think they're good intentions. I'm sorry. I know that I'm not. You and I aren't debating that. But
yeah.
When Joe Biden opens our southern borders and invites rapists, robbers, murderers, drug dealers, the cartel, people who engaged in child trafficking, I'm told that it is a huge, beyond your wildest imagination, industry representing billions upon billions of dollars. And he's inviting these people into our country. I don't believe that it is compassion. It's certainly not compassionate for the citizens of this country. It's certainly not compassionate for Laken Riley and her parents and family. And it's certainly not compassionate for the veterans that I met on the streets of New York just outside of the Roosevelt Hotel who had no clothing, no shelter, no food. Meanwhile, we're enriching these people from foreign countries that came here illegally and giving them a luxurious place to live, a daily stipend, food, and a motorcycle that they could check out like a library book and tour Manhattan. I mean, this is insanity. This is not, you cannot rationalize that on any compassionate basis. There has to be a bad motive intended, because if it was compassionate, we'd take care of those homeless veterans on the streets of New York who I interviewed for this show and met, and my heart bled for them. And they couldn't understand it, and I can't understand it. There is no compassion there.
It's a great point. The distinction here is the appearance of compassion versus real compassion. And these policies are often masked as being compassionate, as, oh, we just want to be friendly and allow people in, and look how much these people are helping our country and so forth. And if we deport them, we're not being compassionate because they're helping our society, whereas they're ignoring that certain criminals have been let in and have led to great damage, for example. So it's this showing one side of the story and not ignoring the ways in which a policy is completely the opposite of compassionate. And this is important because we don't hear that from the mainstream press. We only see one side of the story, and then the people who actually do want to be compassionate are being framed as somehow authoritarian. They flip and invert the script.
Well, I would just, wonder who in the Biden administration would Joe Biden and Dr. Jill, would Mayorkas, would Fauci, would Merrick Garland, like, if they want to be compassionate, would they invite these people into their home for dinner or to spend a long weekend? Yet they'll bring them into the country and deposit them into the heartland of America. And we just had an ICE officer shot and killed in New Hampshire, Connecticut, somewhere in the Northeast this very week from an illegal who came across the northern border. So it's not just the southern border, it's the northern border as well that we have to protect. But there's no compassion here. It is a fiction. It is a lie for political and possibly economic gain. And I am incensed by it, and every American should be incensed by it. And we owe such a debt of gratitude to Donald Trump. But what we owe him, every single American, Republican, Democrat, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, I don't care. What we owe Donald Trump is our support. This is not a partisan issue. It is a common sense issue of right and wrong. And if people are so compassionate, and if that is truly their motivation, join the Peace Corps and go to South America and help these people. Or take your savings and send it to the Red Cross in Guatemala and Mexico and these impoverished countries in South America. You have an opportunity to make your own decisions freely and independently. And if there's enough people that feel that way, then they can have a tremendous impact. But don't bring drug dealers, people who engage in child trafficking, who are willing to murder, rape, and rob, and put them in our country. It is absurd. And it is a lie. It is a lie masquerading as virtue. And there's no virtue. It is purely for political power. And we've seen it. And we thought it was just Joe Biden. We thought it was just Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But now the more we get into the weeds on it, we see the guy from Illinois who wants to be president. He's a heir of the Hyatt hotels, Pritzker, going on television yesterday saying how inhumane this is, that Donald Trump is rounding up all these people and sending them home. Is it inhumane to send people who engage in violent behavior, who came here illegally to our country and have brought huge, overwhelming grief to our own citizens who live next door to these people? Where is the humaneness in that? It's just, and Gavin Newsom, and the governor of Colorado, we're going to obstruct Trump from sending these people back. And they're the people in Aurora, California, who've got members of a gang, the most dangerous gang in the world, who have commandeered apartment buildings and displaced their own citizens, and who have now assaulted police officers who've come to round them up to send them home. I've never seen anything like it in my 71 years.
What seems to have happened here is a level of brainwashing that's really hard to wrap our minds around, because there is such hatred for Trump that people are unable to see anything beyond what the mainstream press headlines are, because they're so conditioned to think that everything he's going to do is going to counter compassion, that it's impossible that his policies could be actually compassionate in some way. And the media is so biased, and so is academia. And so the younger generations have been are growing up with this incredible left-wing bias. It's something I cover in my book, An End to the Upside Down Reset, from all angles, whether it's academia or the mainstream television or the newspapers or the technology industry. We hear one side of the story, and you really have to depart from that to hear the narrative that you laid out so well, that if you want to be compassionate, it's the opposite of many of these left-wing policies that have come in. But unfortunately, and I can say this from my own personal experience, because I come from the mainstream world. For my undergrad, I went to Princeton. I worked in investment banking in New York. I worked in Silicon Valley for about 10 years. So I know a lot of people who are incredibly intelligent intellectually, but who buy into the mainstream narratives because it's all they've been fed. And it's like a form of mind control and hypnosis.
I'm so glad you volunteered your background, because I was sitting here wondering, how does someone who is obviously well educated and a millennial, I believe, living in California, and now you're telling me that you lived in Silicon Valley, how do you maintain such a tremendous moral compass?
I've just been guided by the truth. That's been my goal since I started writing books, because I was just working in Silicon Valley in the business world, and I got hold of some scientific evidence that challenged my own paradigms. And so I've had a compass that says, I want to know the truth and I want to act with integrity. That's been my goal. And it's been really challenging, as you and many members of your audience know, because there's such divisiveness. And if you say certain things, people will call you names. But I think the truth ultimately will come out, and we just have to remain steadfast.
We had Charlie Kirk on just a couple of months ago, and we had this very conversation, and he and I totally agreed. Call me sexist, call me racist, call me misogynist, call me homophobic, call me anything you want to call me. But I am going to tell you the truth as I know it. Yeah. And if that offends your political sensitivities, if that is politically incorrect, and you want to retaliate by calling me a name rather than defending your position, then I say that's on them. And I'm okay with it. You know, they can call me anything they want to, but I'm like you, Mark, and it's so refreshing to hear you say that you were inspired to write your books because of your quest for the truth. Why can every single living American not resolve that that is going to be our singular common denominator, that we are all going to join hands and take a blood oath that we are going to be guided by the truth? How can an organized society work under any other premise?
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why I'm doing this, and I'm glad that you're stating this publicly, because I think when people hear this kind of mentality, it ignites something within us that. Sure, that's why we're here. We're here to be guided by the truth. How could we live in a world of falsehoods? But at the same time, John, I can say from personal experience, it was not so easy, because there were two sides pulling at me, the side that wanted to express the truth, and then the side of me that said, what are going to be the consequences of this? And I've had to do this on multiple levels, because let's say my first few books were not political. And when I wrote my first political book called An End to Upside Down Liberty, and then this other one, An End to the Upside Down Reset, I knew that I would lose some supporters, people that might have agreed with other parts of what I said, but now they're going to say, Mark went off the deep end. Really a shame that Mark's gone in this direction. And that has happened, but I've had to do like what you discussed with Charlie Kirk. It's on them, and I can't control them. It's their journey. And you know what's happened, John, is that when I take these risks, I end up getting exposed to new people and new audiences that really resonate with me that I wouldn't have found if I stayed in my lane before.
Well, maybe you are establishing yourself as a leader, and a leader is willing to take risk and is willing to sacrifice personally in order to assert the truth and take the moral high ground. So I will tell you, Mark, it has been my pleasure and honor to have you on The Truth today. And I hope that you will come back soon and often. Before you leave, how long did it take you to write 7 books?
Well, first of all, John, I want to thank you for all that you do. Thank you for having me on the show. My first book was written in 2017 and published in 2018. And the last book was published in 2024, the 7th one in the series. So it's been rapid fire. I've gone all in. I left my job. I was a partner at my firm in Silicon Valley and had to leave because I wanted to focus on this stuff full time. But I think it's for me personally, it's the most impactful thing I can do to try to learn as much as possible and share it and synthesize it with people. And it's whether it's politics or medicine, talking about viruses or cosmology or the nature of reality. I think we live in such an inverted world that basic truths have been omitted, and we've got to get back to living in alignment with reality.
100%. Now, just mechanically, I'm curious, how do you go about researching and writing your books? How do you search for the truth?
Typically what happens is that I will just learn of something by listening to podcasts or watching social media or reading books, and it will start a thread where then I learn of other sources, and I just follow it where it leads. Often I don't know where it's going to lead me. And then I get to a point after having spent a lot of time on various subjects where a framework emerges and I say, wow, actually there's a new paradigm here. Like with the Great Reset. Oh, people don't understand what the Great Reset is. Let me synthesize what these people are saying and show that it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, that it's not actually compassionate, and how people can be fooled. So it's a process that feels like it's guided, I don't know, by my intuition. And at the end, I realize what I've learned about along the way, whether it's political or otherwise. So for me, it's just following threads. And also, it's really important to look at all sides. I like to look at what resonates with me, but then I like to see what the critics say, or even people I don't agree with. And that leads me with a framework where I can present both sides, and I try to do it objectively, but hopefully readers will see that there is let's say, a clear path that seems more true than another one.
I think that is incredibly well spoken, and I thank you for that. And so where do we buy your book? And if we want to keep in touch and keep up with what you're doing, where do we find you?
My website is a good place to start. It's markgober.com, markgober.com. And I'm on social media on X, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Mark Gober, author. All of my books are available on Amazon in hard copy, Kindle, and Audible formats, and I narrate the Audible for all my books.
I hope you're getting rich and that you've been able to replace that cush job that you left in Silicon Valley.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's been quite the opposite. Book writing is a tough business, but I didn't get into it for the business part of it. I wanted to just do what I thought was right, and we'll see how long I can sustain myself. But this is what I enjoy. I like expressing these ideas because actually, when I first started, podcasts were what ignited the fire for me. They were the first dominoes.
Mark Gober, ladies and gentlemen, and into the upside down reset. He has restored my hope for our country and our future because he is a great leader of the next generation. We're going to be hearing a lot more out of you, Mark Gober, and I hope you will accept my friend request that I'm going to send you later today on Facebook.
Absolutely. Would be honored. Thank you, John.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate
MarkGober.com, everybody, and Amazon, Kindle, and Audible if you want to get his books. And that's the truth. And I'm John Gordon.